is part of our mission to provide leadership, advocacy, and education to ensure the protection of California's diverse cultural heritage and historic places. Most of our attendees today are from California. We have some from outside of California. We welcome you. Not every resident in the state has visited the state capitol and the historic Capitol Park. So today we're going to provide an overview of the proposed expansion that will replace the Capitol's historic East Annex with a larger building, alter the West Capitol Plaza and the historic Capitol Park, including removal of mature trees with historic significance. The purpose of today's program is to provide you with information and resources about this project. The presentation will be followed by a question and answer session with links to the websites where you can communicate with your state representative about the Capitol expansion. Today's session will be recorded and will be available on our website. As John and Chris noted, if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box at the bottom of the screen. They'll be addressed during the question and answer session at the end of the program. We'll be joined today by 4 speakers who will address these issues: the conditions driving the project and the process used to gain approval. In order of presentation, our speakers include Dick Cowan, former chair of the Historic State Capitol Commission. Dick is a registered engineer and the president of the Construction Management Division of Clark & Sullivan Construction. Milford Wayne Donaldson. Wayne is a former state historic preservation officer, and he was appointed by President Obama as the chair of the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation from June 2010 through July 2019. He is a former member of the Historic State Capitol Commission and is the principal of the architectural firm Architect Milford Wayne Donaldson, FAIA. Karen Jacques, with Preservation Sacramento, resides in Sacramento and has served on the Sacramento Preservation Commission and the Sacramento Heritage Board. Paulo Pepper, former member of the Historic State Capitol Commission, is a nationally recognized award-winning ecologist, tree expert, historian, author, urban forest researcher, and retired United States Department of Agriculture Forest Service employee. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dick to start the program.
All right, can you hear me? All right, next slide, please, John. Okay, and let's go. So John is going to put us on the correct slide. Thank you all for joining us today. We really need your help with a project that we think is going to do a lot of damage to our important state capitol and Capitol Park. And the damage could be imminent. We'll talk about that. Next slide. For those of you who are not from Sacramento, here's an image that shows on the left the Sacramento River and the old US 40 highway across the Sacramento River coming down Capitol Mall. And maybe John can use his pointer and circle our wonderful Capitol Park and state capitol. Paula will talk about the park and its historic importance and value today. Wayne will talk about the Annex building and what's proposed for that historic building. And Karen will talk about the area to the west of the state capitol, shown there on the left-hand side of Capitol Park. Next slide. Our state capitol has 2 parts. The first is the 1860 to 1872 construction. I was fortunate enough to work on the restoration of that in the 1970s when I came back home to Sacramento after leaving the Navy. Next slide. The second part is the historic Annex, and this is a view from the east side of the Annex. And I always think, you know, if I were visiting Missouri or Iowa and I walked up to this building, I would think hey, that's a pretty nice building that they have, newer than our 1860s version, but Wayne will talk about some of the importance of that. Next slide. A little about the project. You may not know that the legislature owns the state capitol, while almost all the other buildings are under the executive branch. So this project is being driven by the legislature and its Joint Rules Committee. Mr. Cooley, the chair of Joint Rules, authored a bill that funded $775 million for this project, which has three parts that people will tell you about. A separate bill funded what we call the swing space building. If you add the two numbers together, you're over $1 billion. But since the legislature had to give up the cash to the governor of the 775, they intend to fund the project from bond sales, which will add 30% interest. So just the $775 million piece grows over $1 billion with interest. Legislature gave itself some Sequoia exemptions, no big surprise there. They've done that for some other projects as well. With that, I'll go ahead and turn this over to Wayne Donaldson.
Well, thank you, Dick. Well, first of all, the EIR in the project shows the three elements, which you can sort of see in this first slide here. The new Capitol Annex building is in the sort of a light blue color. And you'll notice the footprint that's over the existing Annex building. So you can see it's almost another 50% in its size besides being taller. In addition, there's a new underground entryway in the visitor center that we see that's really going to destroy a big portion of that West Plaza, which will be discussed later. And then in addition to that, a huge underground parking structure, removing all the trees, in which Paula will talk to that later. So that's really the three elements that we have in the project. Next. The growth of California's economy, population, and complexity occurring during World War II was felt very seriously by California's state leadership. The legislature hastened to keep up, adding new staffs and, of course, new committees, until even a space added by the 1920s office buildings, 1 and 2 across 10th Street from the Capitol, was not enough for legislative business. So in 1949, construction began on an addition on the east side of the Capitol, and the nickname stuck, the Annex. Next. Alfred Eichler, as being the state architect, has designed incredible amounts of buildings during his tenure. And unlike today, when other state buildings are designed by private architectural firms under contract, the Annex was designed by state employees of the state architect's office under Eichler's supervision. And many of these buildings are still with us today. For instance, the Tower Bridge from Sacramento to West Sacramento in 1935 is streamlined modern. And the South Portal, the Golden Gate Tunnel at the Marin County approach. And by the way, these are his own hand sketches. Next. The state office buildings on N Street, as you can see, and the Fairgrounds grandstand at the state fairgrounds. Next. And then several prison additions besides the one at Folsom Prison, as well as several buildings at San Quentin State Prison. Next. So this shows the Annex under construction. And I think it's important that besides Alfred Eichler and his incredible collection of architecture that he did, he was really one that started to what we call the Secretary of the Interior's treatments for historic properties. Next. And one thing, he set his goals very, very clearly. First of all, do not overwhelm or visually compete with the 1860s Capitol. Do not damage the unreinforced brick structure from the 1860s, and do least damage to the California parks and trees. Next. So the exterior design, in order for Eichler to meet his goals, He chose to make the width and the height of the building less than the original Capitol and to limit its extent towards the east so as not to impact the Civil War grove of trees taken from cuttings of every Civil War battlefield. So he was even doing preservation before it became, well, more or less what we see today, where we have all the rules and regulations. His design was really wanting to achieve the maximum space for the legislature without the visual impact. So he elected not to match floor to floor heights of the 1860s buildings, which relied on very high ceilings for cooling, and also to avoid the vibration of pile foundations. He elected a concrete mat foundation so he could limit the weight of the annex structure by using lightweight concrete, a very unusual structural technique for its time. Next. So again, to not complete visually, he adopted the same color and pattern of windows as the original Capitol for the annex, but used only the spare, simple lines of what is now identified as mid-century modern. Lightweight aluminum friezes and storefront provided ornamentation, repeating the themes on the west pediment of the original Capitol. Next. And throughout the building is exceptional original artwork, which is still extant. Olaf Carlo Malmquist, an American sculptor, graduated from the Yale School of Fine Arts and also from the American Academy in Rome. He also contributed to many art pieces at the 1939 Golden Gate International Exposition. And this artwork is sprinkled throughout the annex building, and it's in incredibly good condition because one of the most important things was to, okay, next. One of the most important thing was to keep the interior rich and clean. And inside the annex, Eichler chose materials and designs of the times, the 1950s, with the most modern lighting and ceilings, spare and simple marble and plaster walls meant to have no maintenance. And he also continued the aluminum for the interior door frames and stairway moldings, which was the new material for its time. The signage is modern 50s design, and much of it still survives within the building. The display cases in the main corridors, as you can see in the lower left there, highlights each counted were immediate success with the public and continue to delight today, even allowing children to design many of the displays. Next. However, the office in the 1950s, air conditioning and electric power and telephone lines all met the needs of the planned occupants. However, elevators were staffed by state employees, which served state and public and the members that used separate elevators on themselves. So the layout of the building allowed fast access from legislators' offices to either hearing rooms or the chambers. Next. So we all agree that dedicated in 1952, the annex has served with very little change since its construction. But the legislature proved to be a poor steward of Eichler's efforts, as building codes were required to update for better fire protection and exiting, and as the electrical power demands of copiers, printers grew, and as the legislature squeezed more and more staff into the same building, as well as the air conditioning system reaching the end of their expected life, the legislature ignored the plans of the general services to perform phased upgrades, not as convenient and too disruptive. So we agree, the building has served us well, but we do need to have a thermal update, but doing that through the restoration and renovation of the annex building. So now I would like to introduce Karen. Karen?
Next slide, please. So now you've heard from Wayne the reasons that it's so critical to keep the historic East Annex. So now let me talk to you about what we would lose if the Visitor Center as planned were to go in. So in this slide, you're looking down Capitol Mall, looking east toward the Capitol. And you can see that one block east of the block in which the Capitol sits is the beginning of the historic district. And what you see with that circle is the location of the historic fountain. And this, the west side of the Capitol and the mall have been historically, from long ago until very recently, the scene of multiple demonstrations, marches, activities. There have been times when this entire East Annex, the entire Capitol Mall that you're looking at has been filled with people coming to express their opinions. Most recently, it was the Women's March and the March for Science. And you can also see from this what a grand entrance we have to the west facade of the Capitol. So now go to the next slide. So this gives you a view. We're looking from 10th Street East at the Capitol, and this gives you a view of all of the details on our meticulously restored historic Capitol, what are known as the West Steps in front of it, and then what's known as the West Plaza. And this again is has been the gathering space historically for so many activities, from protests to demonstrations to celebrations to fairs where people can bring things that they want the community to know about. Like there's been a climate change fair held there, and every year the tribal communities hold a fair showing artifacts and information about the different tribes. So the one other thing I want to say about this is this will all be excavated to build the Visitor Center. So the entire plaza and those wide west steps that you're seeing in front of you will be gone, and will take people down to a basement level of the Capitol. Next slide, please. This is just a shot of the Capitol. The Capitol building is on your left, the mall is on your right, and this is getting set up for an event with a speaker stand and chairs, and as happens with so many events, there are people distributing information about their causes and their concerns under those little tent structures. Next slide, please. The next, again, this is a major celebration area in front of the Capitol, and this is the annual Christmas tree. And this being a year before COVID, people were gathered for one of the many holiday celebrations that takes place there. And I just want to stress that this is an area that is tremendously important to the Sacramento community, and this West Plaza area is used for so many, many events. Next slide, please. Okay, this is one of 3 drawings that I will show you of what's planned with the Visitor Center. Despite the fact that there's been a draft EIR and a revised draft EIR, it was only at a meeting September 9th of 2020 that the community for the first time had any inkling of what this Visitor Center was going to look like. And you can see here how the bollards have been put up. It's going to be excavated down to a basement level. The entire plaza itself is lost. Next slide, please. This gives you a closer in overview of this slanting plaza, or this slanting walkway going down to a basement level, and the profound changes that that makes to the front primary facade of the historic Capitol. Next slide, please. This, I think, gives you an even more dramatic overview of the excavation, this added on roof for the entrance into the Visitor Center, and then the Visitor Center continues on into the basement of the Capitol. And it's, you know, some of us, as you see on the caption up there, have called it the new Disneyland. It looks for all the world like a Disneyland entrance, or maybe an entrance to an airport in anywhere USA. But again, the entire historic plaza is lost, and the west facade of the Capitol is irreparably changed and damaged. And as part of all of this, what we get out of this is a giant bill. Dick already talked to you about the $1 billion that the project would come to, and that apparently does not include the entire cost of this Visitor Center, because at the Joint Rules meeting on September 9th of 2020, where we first saw these elevations, what we learned was that there's some additional money, we don't know how much, for this center that they would have to get back from the governor or get permission to issue as part of the new set of bonds that would fund this thing. So we don't even know the total. We just know that it would be a large taxpayer bill for the destruction of historic resources. I've talked to you about what we lose in terms of the public function in front of that, the Capitol at the Plaza, and the richness of that. What we've also lost is any semblance of transparency in the development of this project. Again, we didn't even see what these elevations until September 9th of 2020. We still have no word of whether there will be yet another revised draft EIR. The two previous ones didn't give us much of any relevant information. We will lose landscaping to the side of the plaza. It's not clear how much. We will also lose the convenience that many of us who were visitors to the Capitol had, because this will now be a totally separate entrance and the only entrance for visitors. And so those of us who are going to the Capitol not to see the tourist attractions yet one more time, but because we have a meeting with our legislator, or we're going to speak in favor or opposition of a bill at a hearing, we'll have to go through this entire long Visitor Center to get to our destination, which is not particularly welcoming for those of us wanting to have an active say in our government by meeting with our legislators or going to a hearing. Another thing that you need to be aware of about this major excavation, and about all of the other excavation that will take place for the other parts of the project, is that the Capitol is the site of a former Nisinan village, and members and leaders of the tribal communities in Sacramento have said that in doing all of this excavation, it will involve excavation and potential destruction of tribal historic resources, and may involve the disruption of sacred sites that are burials. And so along with all of our objections, PAC's objections to the East Annex project as currently planned, and our need to save our historic resources, we also stand with the tribal communities in wanting to make sure that their concerns are also addressed, and they are actively expressing those. So on that note, I would like to turn it over to Paula, who will talk to you more about the Capitol grounds and the trees.
Thanks, Karen. And to follow from her, I'll take a look at the various plans and how and which parts of the park will be impacted, with particular concern about older trees. Why older trees? Some are historic, planted with the original Capitol's establishment, and others are equally historic for other reasons. or planted as memorials. But older means larger, so they provide many more benefits. So this is the plan provided in the 2019 draft environmental impact reports on what the future capital, not just the annex, but a huge new underground parking structure and the huge new visitor center would impact. The original plan, next slide, please. The original plan and the DEIRs required extensive changes to the landscape. Here you see outlined all the trees, all the areas slated for excavation to a 30-foot depth, superimposed over the 2014 tree inventory of the blocks surrounding the park. With this plan, over 100 trees were within the excavation footprint, which means they would have to be removed before excavation. And many others outside of this in what was called a 50-foot construction perimeter exist. Regardless, the project represents a very significant change to the 4 city blocks of park that surround the Capitol that we all enjoy as the public. Next slide. Now there are 3 new plans, yet none of these show all the options for the underground parking garage nor the visitor center. So let's take a look at the proposed additional changes. Next slide. This, as you've seen, is the new visitor center. Every tree, as well as all other landscaping that you see in this photo, will be changed. Much less greenery, more sterile, more unnecessary lawn and concrete for a state that prides itself on being a climate change leader. One has to wonder what they're thinking. The 2 deodar cedars that are endangered here with removal hold 52,000 pounds of carbon in their wood. Cut them down, damage them significantly, and they die, and that is all lost. Next slide, please. There are now 3 options for the underground parking. Option 1, at your top left, while smaller than what was in the original plan and the draft EIRs, it still takes out numerous and large significant trees, not to mention other landscaping, taken well care of for years. Option 2 takes out the moon tree. I'll speak more to that in a bit, and several other historic memorial redwood trees. Option 3 is the one that's on the top or the middle right, is the one that legislators seemed to favor on their September 9th Joint Rules Commission hearing in 2020. Regardless of which plan is used, massive changes will happen to all of the landscape surrounding the Capitol. Because they use the square design predominantly for the presentation to the Joint Rules Committee, I've used it on this slide and the next slide to illustrate the changes to the landscape overall. Next slide. Here you see imposed on the actual landscape, the visitor center, the square design, and what seemed to be preferred parking option 3 that stretches from N Street north to L Street on what is called 12th Street. 12th Street looks like a sidewalk, but it is still referred to as 12th Street access to the Capitol, and it belongs to the city, not the legislature. The excavations still go from 25 to 30 feet deep. Trees are affected for at least 25 feet beyond these outlines. So let's look at a few of the impacted trees from the ground up. Next slide. These 4 deodar cedars are part of a row of 12, originally planted from the 1870s to the early 1880s. Concern is that at least 2, if not 4 of the trees would survive after having roots cut or potentially needing complete removal after excavation for the visitor center. Next slide. This Coxsper coral tree is the largest in California and is also listed as an international monumental tree, measuring over 17 feet around its trunk. It's among those needing removal for the 12th Street parking structure. Next slide. This is the moon tree I referred to previously. This coast redwood grew from a seed that was carried to the moon on Apollo 14 in 1971. It is one of only 10 surviving redwood moon trees in the United States. It's scheduled to be removed with at least 2 of the Annex construction plans. Not sure if the 3 that we've shown will be the last plans or if something more close to the original DER will be in place. We have no idea. Next slide. On the left, we're looking from N Street north along where 12th Street underground parking will go. On the right photo, you see the existing annex, and every tree in this image must be removed, including that beautiful giant sequoia on the right, for excavation to occur. Next slide. Further along 12th Street stand 2 historic palms and this last remaining old magnolia in the road of excavation. Its roots, typical of magnolias, are closer to the surface and spread widely. It's the last remaining of 5 magnolias that once stretched along 12th Street. 4 were actually removed when the historic annex was built. What I've shown you are just a few of the trees now impacted by this project. There are many more. Depending on what the plan ultimately chosen, anywhere from 66 to 100 trees will be impacted. The public apparently has no choice on which plan is to be decided upon. In addition, there are new walkways planned, which will cut more tree roots, some on historic trees. You can see some of them are going through the line of, on the left, of historic deodar cedars. This is supposedly designed to better encourage the flow of walking traffic. Next slide, please. This is the last photo I'll show you. This looks from L Street south along what will become the underground parking lot with free parking for legislators. All the trees you see here must be removed to excavate. There are currently 210 unique species in the park, nearly half of which are represented by only 1 specimen. As the Historic State Capitol Commission recommended, an overall tree management plan should have been in place years ago to ensure the perpetuation of this unique park resource. But such a plan has been denied by the Joint Rules Committee. Next slide, please. The bottom line is the public doesn't know about these changes. We need to know what the landscape plan is well before construction, and we need to have a voice. Which trees will be permanently removed? What will the entire landscape look like once complete? How long will it take for new trees to grow the size of removed trees and provide the same amount of ecosystem services to us, the public? Depending on the plan chosen, these threatened trees currently store well over 216,000 pounds of carbon in their wood, and annually they intercept 15,000 pounds more of carbon dioxide, cleansing our air. They intercept 78,000 pounds of rainfall, not pounds, sorry, gallons of rainfall, keeping that from running off into gutters and ultimately our rivers. The public deserves to know the plan long before a shovel hits the ground, and we should be part of the planning process. With that, I'll hand it over to Dick.
Okay, so the next slide, John, is, go ahead, one more, please. This slide I wanted to include on the September 2020 Joint Rules Committee hearing. Many of us were just astonished at this. We were wondering why the annex seemed in the presentation to have grown, and evidently it's hollow. This seems to be a multi-floor galleria that's included. I'm not sure why. I don't know that this was ever part of the original CHSQA architectural firm program for the building. But I don't know because that program was denied. What I can see is that the scope and the costs of the project seem to be growing. Next slide, please. I wish I could tell you more definite answers. You know, I know you're going to ask some questions, and a lot of our answers will be, well, we aren't sure. We've been denied, even under a Legislative Open Records Act request. What is the program? It was privileged, I guess. That's kind of funny. The document that the Joint Rules Committee used to adopt and embrace the program, the project, was not shared even with the Oversight Committee. We asked for that on the Legislative Open Records Act. It too was privileged. Why not follow the law? For nationally registered properties, don't you have to do a study that shows how it could meet your goals? Don't you have to go to the State Historic Preservation Office? Will there be another recirculation of the EIR? Since this design from September 20th is so different that was in the recirculated draft EIR, and when will that EIR be certified? We don't know. Next slide. The three designs that Paula referred to that were presented September 2020, the one on the left is called the Double T, and it does extend, as you can see, past the north and south boundaries of the 1860s Capitol. All three of them visually overshadow the 1860s original building, violating what was promised as a goal of the project by the committee and what was committed to in the EIR. Next slide. More of the same. You can kind of see a street level. You know, the 1860s building now begins to look small, something that Eichler took trouble not to allow to happen. Next slide. Okay, here's what we'd like to happen. Hold off, folks. Slow down. Tell us what you've been doing so far. Share your documents, and then call for public input. Allow the people to come in and speak about how the project should be slated. Adopt some kind of a governance structure so that the scope and the budget don't just keep growing. And we think that we could replan the project with your help and the public, making the historic annex safe. It does need code updates, and it needs to have its old equipment replaced. We think we can save the West Plaza. We think we can save the park. We think if we renovated the annex, used above grade parking in a nearby location, we could perhaps save 800 million out of the total cost of the project. Our numbers are very soft because we've not been given any of the information that would allow us to do any serious kind of cost analysis, but we think big savings are available. Next slide. How can you help us? Here's what you can do. If you know somebody who knows somebody, please get them involved. The website for our group, Public Accountability for Our Capital, is shown here. You can go there and sign our petition, receive our email updates. If you want to make suggestions to us or volunteer information or contacts you have, please use this email address. And a sister organization, Save Our Capital, has a really terrific tool on their website. It's a take action button that will automatically tailor your message to your legislator, depending on where you live, and also the state leaders. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cindy, Christine, and John, and we can take some questions.
Thank you so much, Dick. We do have a couple of questions. Everyone can go ahead and turn on their video and their audio so you can participate in this. And I've encouraged people who are watching on Facebook. Also, you could put your questions in to the Facebook comment section and we can address those as well. We have a couple of questions that came into the chat. So John, I got to shuffle a little bit trying to catch up with those. One of the questions I had that was probably fairly easy for you to answer, Dick, is any of the building below grade? I think that was in one of the photographs you showed, one of the renderings. Is that true?
Yes, in the annex, the parking is in the footprint of the building below grade. And the ramps you could see in Paula's slide along 12th Street are the entry to that. The West Capitol has a basement as well. That is the cafeteria area, the what was the bookstore, and an area that the state parks uses to operate their visitor program in the basement. Parks has been kind of kicked out of their space. I hope construction has not started in the space they used to have. But I do know they've been asked to move out already. So that kind of indicates the project is ongoing. The bookstore has been also asked to move out. I think they're already gone.
And another question, are there other options for the parking visitor center other than the ones that you've shown? Like you've said that, well, that was just the question. Are there other options?
So yes, we've identified some, of course, there's some existing state-owned and privately owned or city-owned parking structures nearby that could be used. There's vacant state property within a block and a half. Above ground parking costs about half per stall the cost of below grade parking. And so we think even with the cost of a tunnel, such as the Capitol uses in Washington, D.C., we could find a way to find parking that doesn't mean we have to lose historic and monumental trees.
I guess it's my turn to ask a question. There were a number of questions, and I think we should ask this now because of the number of questions about the recent events and concerns regarding security. And I think a lot of people were asking, somebody actually said that they had concerns about the security from the image of the glass entrance with the skylight that you showed, and they thought that that was a risk. But then there were also concerns about how can the Capitol address security concerns while still respecting the historic character of the building.
Gosh, I don't have a good answer. Wayne, would you have any thought about that? I know security has been properly considered by the Joint Rules Committee and their consultants. It's a serious issue. We don't have any word from them recently. Wayne, would you want to offer any other comment on that?
Sure. Well, as you can imagine, with the breach that happened a few days back, I think you're finding that all of the large public institutions, not just state capitals and other federal buildings, are overlooking it again. It's almost like a 9/11 project or after the Oklahoma bombing. So these things will take a new look on them, and I'm sure that a lot of these things will be addressed. As you know, the Capitol Police, just like a lot of the policemen that are on our own state capitol, they're really more like transportation security guards. They're not trained to be rushed in such a matter and stuff like that, but it's severely important that we are prepared to address those items. I've even heard things now coming back from the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation that there may be metal shutter lockdowns within the state capitol, which I'm hoping there's not, but these would be automatically large metal, I guess, garage doors, for lack of a better name, that would just drop down in terms of emergency that would be almost impossible to get through. So I'm not really sure where all this is going in the future, but we're also looking at it from the state capitol perspective as well. And I thought that some of the comments that were coming in on the Q's and A's and stuff that we're looking at that are very important to realize. We need to look at those as well as look at them for right now, because we just don't know where the future is going to go, at least the immediate future.
I know there was a question about where parking is now, and it is underneath the East Annex at this point in time.
Great, thank
Yeah.
you for, yeah.
And well, as you know, after the Oklahoma bombing, most of the state governments and stuff, as well as the federal government coming down, and that's when you started to see a lot of the bullards being put up because of the retrofits that I had to do, a lot of them when I had my office, in terms of coming in with a bomb and blasting. So we had to do blast-proof windows. We couldn't have events where you had bridges going underneath walkways to other state buildings. Those were all shut down. They became dead ends to which you had to go around. So I'm not really sure what the future is going to hold for us, but I got a feeling that you will see some major changes coming up.
And to sort of segue into another question that Paula was sort of addressing in her portion, I think there was a question about the trees, and the question was how can these trees how can these trees be managed in any sort of potential project? Is there any sort of scenario where those trees can be moved? Or would it be impossible to do that? And I think that was the main question, but there were a lot of people saying this, it's just crazy that in the city of trees that we're looking at losing 60 to 100 trees. And so maybe you can comment on a few of those things.
Yeah, and in all fairness, the draft environmental impact report and subsequent reports have said 20 to 30 trees would be permanently removed. We don't know which 20 to 30 trees. We have some idea of some of them because of where deep excavation has to go. Large trees can be moved. There have been huge trees moved within California. Initially, there was discussion of trying to move 2 of the large deodar cedars, but I work with a lot of arborists, and many had deep concerns over that for 2 reasons. One is that they're a row, winds blow from north to south. You remove a couple of the trees, 2 trees in line have never been exposed as heavily to wind before, so you can begin having windfall damage. I'm assuming that the costs of moving these huge, large trees were prohibitive. I mean, they are prohibitive. It costs a lot of money. The smaller trees most definitely can be moved. We don't know where they'll be held, if they'll be replanted after excavation is done, or if there'll be an entirely new landscape. Most of the small trees can be moved very successfully. But hopefully, given that it's going to take 3 to 4 years to build the annex, they can't be held above ground forever. They have to be replanted. So, you know, we'd like to know what a real plan is and see it and see visuals on the landscape plans. Because this is going to change for the next 5 to 6 years, every side of the Capitol, every side of the park, and our access to it.
Yes, thanks for that, Paula. We got a comment from Barbara, who says that she also believes that elderly trees will not survive any kind of this transplanting kind of process. So I think I wanted to ask a question about the 1960s edition by the architect Eichler. I guess this would be your area, Wayne, but there's no relationship between that Eichler and the architect developers of the Eichlers. It looks like you're sitting near one. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't think there's any relationship, but I'm not sure. I didn't really do that research. As you know, he was several years before many of the projects when he graduated and everything else. So I just think it's a name association. I have not done that research though.
It's not the same Eichler.
It's not the same Eichler. We're just wondering if they're related.
I
Seems like
know.
sometimes you find out they're cousins or something, and then, you know, they have a big impact.
Chris, you're the Google queen. You could probably find out in just 2
I
seconds.
am. I'm going to look into that and I'll be able to post that later. I was wondering if Cindy, if you might have any questions that you wanted to ask in terms of the advocacy and where people, we did post in the chat box where people can sign the petition at saveourcapital.org. And I didn't know if you wanted to comment on that process.
Well, we're encouraging people to reach out if you have a concern, on one side or the other, to reach out to your legislators. You know, I think for us as an organization, that there are many concerns here, but I think the one that concerns me the most is the process. And the public, you know, I'm looking at the chat, there's a lot of disputes about how many trees and the boundaries and perimeters and the impact. Well, I think that's really is getting to the heart of this, is that these things should be discussed publicly with the public input so that we know, and we're not left to speculate and we're not shut out of the process. So I would certainly encourage everyone in attendance to learn more about it, and we'll show those links before we close, but to get information. But I have personally, I have a question. One of the things that intrigued me, this is directed to Paula, was the Civil War trees. And I don't think many people know what about that aspect of the park, and are any of the Civil War trees impacted? Could you just explain that?
Yes. Originally, there were, I think, 37 trees. We are now down to 6. No tree management plan. The last 3 that fell were in 2017, and Chairman Cooley of the Joint Rules Committee shows it on the Annex website as that they're saving fallen trees and they're recycling that wood. But the efforts of Mike Nielsen, who supervises the grounds crews at Capitol Park, and myself, and we got the UC Davis Arboretum to join in. We are working, and this is separate from Joint Rules or anybody else, to find and start new trees to replace these single individual trees that have gone down. Part of that is also looking for new Civil War trees. The trees, most of the Civil War trees are outside of the actual footprint of parking garage, structure, visitor center. It's all on the parking structure side, that the east side. And only perhaps an old Civil War tulip might be affected. Its roots may be affected. The magnolia that I showed on my presentation was not one of the Civil War trees. It was planted later. But given that even amongst the Civil War trees, we only have 6 left, we need to do better.
So going back to this question about process that Cindy was leading to as well, there were a few questions about consultation and involvement of the public. One particularly was from Jan. She's saying, is the current Shippo involved in consultation on this project via PRC 5024? And if so, what impact has that consultation had? If Shippo review and consultation has not been involved, why not?
Well, that's a great question. I'd like to know the answer to that question as well. As near as we can tell, no representative of no state legislator, no state employee has been to see the state Shippo concerning this project. There is a submission process in the statute, and we believe this building is not exempt from the statute that requires every registered building to have its plan submitted for Shippo review and comment. This building is not exempt as far as we read the law, but we don't know. We don't know what's going on. I think there's federal statute too. I'm not an attorney, maybe Wayne knows, that says once a building is federally listed, there's a process one would use. We think if I were a wealthy man, if I were to hire any of the wonderfully talented California architects who can take a historic existing building and see how it meets modern use, I think the Joint Rules Committee would be delighted. But that study has never been done. What a tragedy that we're marching forward to demolish a nationally registered significant building by a significant architect, and we can't even have the qualified preservation architect do that test fit to show how much of the legislature's goals could be met.
Now, John, let me chime in just a second. I know we're really close to ending this session at 1 o'clock. And you're right, Dick, there's been no contact. The legislation is just like their Sequoia is basically just signing it off and not even complying with that, which will probably lead to a more a legal endeavor down the line. It's interesting that the architects that they hired, which is a large firm, close to 100 people out of Idaho, CSHQA, they did the Idaho State Capitol Historic Preservation, Restoration, and Rehab on it. If you go to their website, and I put that as part of the, I think it was the Q&As and stuff, so you go see. And they did a wonderful job on that. They did have to do some smaller underground wings to complement the building, but with minimum changes in terms of the appearance and going around the building and everything else. And they got several awards for doing that. So I'm not sure who is telling them what to do and how to do it and all that sort of stuff. They seem to be very capable of doing it. They have a West Sacramento office. So I'm not sure, we just don't have any answers, and we just can't seem to get the answers out. I don't know why. It's just, it's beyond me.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Wayne. I think those are good closing words. What we want to emphasize is that there's a lot of process here that we want to make sure that we're following the guidelines that we've already set up for historic resources, landscapes, and buildings, and the review of any changes to those. I wanted to conclude and thank everybody for joining us today, especially Dick, Wayne, Karen, Paula, and Cindy. And of course, you'll see me and John in a couple of weeks. And be sure to come to our website at californiapreservation.org to see all of our upcoming programs. Did you have anything else, John?
Yeah, very quickly, just a thank you to everybody. And also I'm pasting a link into the chat box to leave feedback about today's program. I know we weren't able to cover all the questions. I've been monitoring the questions, and there are literally probably over a dozen questions we weren't able to address. So if you'd like to, if you have any questions you'd like to have answered by email, just email them to us, and we can forward to our panelists at cpf@californiapreservation.org. With that, make note of the chat box, leave us feedback. We look forward to seeing you at our future programs this January in partnership with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. It's a 3-part series on endangered sites within California that are associated with our diverse histories. So feel free to let us know if you have any thoughts in the meantime. So I'm going to close out the video and sound and everything, but I'll leave the chat room open a bit for people to leave feedback. Thank you all.
Hey, John, before you leave, is there any way to show the slide with the links and where people can go for more information, or can you put that into the chat?
I'll do that right now.
Thank you.